Imagine this. You're a high school teacher living an ordinary life when a former student you barely remember shows up at your door. Except they haven't forgotten you. Not even close. For 15 years, they've been watching, waiting, planning. They've already tried to take you 4 times without you ever knowing. And now, they're ready. This isn't fiction. This is what happened to Mary Stauffer, her 8-year-old daughter Beth, and a 6-year-old boy named Jason Wilkman in 1980. What unfolded was one of the most disturbing cases of obsession and abduction in American history. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a story that will make you question everything you think you know about the people around you. If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. And if you find value in what we do here, leave a comment below letting me know your thoughts. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I need to issue a content warning. This case involves discussions of abduction and sensitive subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's get into it. Mary Stauffer was born on January 1st, 1943, in West Duluth, Minnesota. When she was just 10 years old, her family relocated to Hermantown, a quiet suburb where life moved slowly and everyone knew their neighbors. The Stauffer family was deeply religious, active members of their local Baptist church, and young Mary embraced that life wholeheartedly. She volunteered constantly, found community in her faith, and genuinely loved being part of something bigger than herself. At 16, while volunteering at church, Mary met a young man named Irving Stauffer. He was 2 to 3 years older, attending Bethel University where he studied mathematics. The connection was immediate. They started dating, and their relationship blossomed around shared values and a common purpose. In 1961, Mary graduated high school and followed Irving to Bethel University, where she majored in math with a minor in music. Irving, meanwhile, had enrolled in seminary school with dreams of becoming a Baptist minister. Despite the demanding nature of his studies, the couple remained committed to each other. Mary graduated in 1965 and began her career as a high school math teacher. She took a position at Ramsey High School in Roseville, teaching 9th grade algebra. The commute was about 30 minutes from her home, but Mary didn't mind. She loved teaching. She loved making a difference in young people's lives. Eventually, Mary and Irving married. As part of his seminary training, Irving was required to participate in missionary work, so Mary took a temporary leave from teaching to join him. From 1967 to 1968, the newlyweds traveled to the Philippines for their first missionary trip together. It lasted several months before they returned to Minnesota and resumed their normal lives. But normal wouldn't last long. Irving eventually became a Baptist minister, and the couple was offered a position in Polk, Nebraska, a small village where they knew absolutely no one. The congregation was taking a risk on a newly ordained minister with zero pastoral experience. Mary and Irving were taking a risk too, moving to an unfamiliar place with no support system. But the community welcomed them with open arms, and what was supposed to be a 2-year commitment turned into 5. During their time in Polk, Mary gave birth to their daughter Beth in 1972, followed by their son Steve in 1974. In 1975, when Beth was 3 years old and Steve was just 1, the family embarked on another missionary trip to the Philippines. This time, they planned to stay for several years instead of just a few months. During this period, they established multiple churches across the Central Islands, dedicating themselves fully to their mission. In 1979, the Stauffer family returned to the United States and moved into the Baptist Missionary Apartments in Arden Hills, Minnesota. This was the same area where Bethel University was located, so in many ways, Mary and Irving had come full circle. They were on a 1-year furlough, a break from their missionary work, with plans to return to the Philippines after 12 months. That year passed quickly. By May of 1980, the family was preparing for their next chapter. They were scheduled to spend 4 years in the Philippines, so they packed up everything they owned. Boxes were stacked, belongings labeled, excitement building. The kids are getting fresh haircuts, so they'd look their best when they arrived. Everything was falling into place. But on Friday, May 16th, 1980, just 5 days before their departure, everything changed. 36-year-old Mary woke up that Friday morning with a mental checklist. There were last-minute errands to run, final preparations to make. One of those tasks was getting the kids' haircuts. That morning, she took 6-year-old Steve to Carol's beauty salon for his trim. After that, they ran a few more errands around town. Around 3:45 in the afternoon, Mary returned home and picked up 8-year-old Beth. It was time for her haircut. Mary was driving a 1973 Ford LTD that the family had borrowed from the church. The The salon was close, only a 5-minute drive, so this was supposed to be quick and easy. Get the haircut, come home, continue packing. Irving stayed home with Steve while Mary and Beth headed out. At the salon, Beth sat in the chair and got her hair trimmed. The employees later confirmed that mother and daughter arrived for their appointment. Beth got her haircut, and they left the salon around 4:30 in the afternoon. They presumably started driving home. Meanwhile, back at the house, Irving's sister and some close friends arrived around 6 o'clock in the evening. They had organized a small going-away dinner party for the family, a chance to say goodbye before the big move. Everyone gathered, ready to celebrate. But Mary and Beth weren't there. At first, Irving wasn't too concerned. Maybe they'd stopped at the store. Maybe they'd run into a friend. But as 6 o'clock became 6:30 and 6:30 became 7, a knot began forming in his stomach. Back in 1980, cell phones weren't common. There was no way to send a quick text asking where they were. So Irving called the beauty salon. The employee confirmed that yes, Mary and Beth had been there. Yes, they'd completed the appointment. And yes, they'd left around 4:30. That was 2.5 hours ago. If they just stopped to grab something at the store, they would have been home by now. If there'd been car trouble, someone would have called. Irving started making more calls. He contacted missionary colleagues. He called local hospitals, asking if there'd been any accidents reported. Nothing. No one had seen them. No hospitals had any record of them. It was as if Mary and Beth had simply vanished. That night, Irving called the police to report his wife and daughter missing. But the police response wasn't what Irving had hoped for. Mary was an adult. Adults have the right to go wherever they want, whenever they want. If she decided to take a drive and lost track of time, that wasn't a crime. Detectives suggested that maybe Mary was still out running errands. Maybe there were marital problems and she needed space. Maybe she'd simply chosen not to come home. Irving was frustrated. His wife and child were missing, and law enforcement didn't seem to be treating it seriously. But there was another reason police weren't prioritizing the Stauffer case. That same afternoon, another child had gone missing from the same area. 6-year-old Jason Wilkman. Jason was a cheerful, curious little boy, loved by everyone who knew him. That afternoon, he'd been playing at Hazeltine Park with a friend. For privacy, we'll call this friend Carl. The two boys were hanging around the parking lot when a car pulled up. The driver was acting strangely, and it caught the boys' attention. They approached the vehicle. And that's when Carl watched in horror as a man grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk of the car. Miraculously, the man didn't see Carl. So as soon as the car sped away, Carl ran home and told his parents what had happened. Police were called immediately. It was clear that Jason had been abducted. Now here's where things got strange. Jason had disappeared from the same area where Mary and Beth were last seen. The beauty salon wasn't far from Hazeltine Park. Roseville was a safe, quiet town. Multiple disappearances in the same afternoon from the same vicinity? That wasn't normal. Some people thought it was a bizarre coincidence. Others suspected the cases might be connected. But Irving confirmed that his family didn't know Jason Wilkman. There was no relationship between them. So detectives initially treated the cases as separate. They focused their energy on finding Jason. Meanwhile, they also began looking at Irving as a potential suspect in his own family's disappearance. It's standard procedure. In most cases, when someone goes missing, investigators look at the people closest to them first. Spouses, partners, family members. Statistically, that's where the answers usually are. Detectives questioned Irving. They implied that maybe he knew more than he was letting on. Maybe there were problems in the marriage. Maybe Mary had a reason to leave. Irving took a polygraph test. He passed. The morning after Jason's abduction, detectives returned to Hazeltine Park to search for evidence. They combed the parking lot, looking for anything that might lead them to the kidnapper. And then they found it. A license plate, lying on the ground. They ran the numbers. When the results came back, investigators were stunned. The license plate belonged to the 1973 Ford LTD that Mary Stauffer had been driving the day she disappeared. Mary's car was green. Witnesses at the park had reported seeing a green car. Now her license plate had been found at the scene of Jason's abduction. Suddenly, it was undeniable. The disappearance of Mary and Beth Stoffer was connected to the abduction of Jason Wilkman. But how? If the families didn't know each other, what linked them? Had they all been taken by the same person? And if so, why? Carl, Jason's friend, had seen the kidnapper. He was able to provide a description, and investigators used it to create a composite sketch. The image was distributed to the media and published in newspapers across the state. Approximately 300 officers and volunteers fanned out across the region, searching for any sign of Jason, Mary, or Beth. And then the media made a decision that would complicate everything. They published the composite sketch of the suspect right next to a photograph of Irving Stauffer. The sketch showed a man with glasses. Irving wore glasses. The hair wasn't quite the same, but when the two images were side by side, some people started seeing similarities that weren't really there. Tips started flooding in, but instead of useful leads, police were inundated with calls from people saying the same thing over and over. The husband did it. Irving was devastated. Not only were his wife and daughter missing, but now the public suspected him of being involved. The investigation was drowning in useless tips, and the real kidnapper was still out there. When Mary's brother Tom heard the news from their parents, he couldn't process it. It felt surreal. Things like this didn't happen to people you knew. They happened on the news. They happened to strangers. At the time, Tom was a softball coach at Hermantown High School. Colleagues said he would break down crying on the bus rides to and from school. He didn't know if he'd ever see his sister again. Irving's faith was being tested in ways he'd never imagined. He was a minister, a man who dedicated his life to God, and now he was being forced to confront the possibility that he might never see his wife or daughter again. He prayed constantly. He clung to the belief that the Lord was protecting Mary and Beth wherever they were. At one point during the investigation, FBI agent Gary Samuel called Irving with news. They'd found an unidentified woman's body in southern Minnesota. Irving's heart stopped, but after dental records were analyzed, the body was confirmed not to be Mary's. Irving exhaled. It was a strange kind of relief. She was still out there, somewhere. 2 weeks passed with no answers. Then, on June 30th, Irving received a letter in the mail. It was from Mary. In the letter, she claimed that she wasn't missing. She'd simply gone away. She urged the police to stop looking for her. Irving stared at the words, his mind racing. This didn't sound like Mary. Something was wrong. A second letter arrived soon after. This one was more urgent. Mary wrote that if the police didn't stop the investigation, they would never see her again. Irving knew immediately that these letters had been written under duress. Mary wouldn't just leave. She wouldn't abandon her family. Someone had forced her to write these. He brought the letters to the FBI. Agents examined them closely and agreed. The language was coerced. The tone was off. These letters were proof that Mary and Beth had been kidnapped. But by who? And why? On June 16th, exactly 1 month after Mary and Beth disappeared, the phone rang at the Stauffer home. It was Father's Day. Irving picked up. On the other end of the line was his daughter's voice. Hello, Dad. Bethy, are you okay? Yes. Is Mommy there? Yes. Oh, that's good. Happy Father's Day. Thank you so much, sweetie. The FBI had the call on tape. They tried to trace it, but the technology failed. The call couldn't be tracked. What made the call even stranger was that the kidnapper didn't ask for ransom. Beth wasn't instructed to deliver any demands. She wasn't told to give her father instructions on how to get them back. It seemed like the kidnapper had simply allowed her to wish her father a happy Father's Day. But why? If this wasn't about money, what did the kidnapper want? Irving hung up the phone, his hands shaking. He'd just heard his daughter's voice for the first time in a month. She was alive. Mary was alive. But he still had no idea where they were, or when he'd see them again. The investigation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. What happened next would reveal a truth so disturbing, so unthinkable, that it would change the Stauffer family forever. If you want to hear the rest of this story, make sure you're subscribed to Faces and hit that notification bell. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts so far. And if you found this video valuable, please give it a like. It helps more people discover these important stories. For weeks, the investigation had gone nowhere. The FBI was analyzing the letters. Local law enforcement was following dead-end leads. Irving was caught between hope and despair, clinging to the sound of his daughter's voice on that Father's Day phone call. But behind the scenes, investigators were piecing together a profile of the kidnapper. Whoever had taken Mary, Beth, and Jason wasn't operating randomly. This person was organized, calculated, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to have a specific fixation on Mary Stauffer. Then, in late July of 1980, came the break they'd been desperately waiting for. A tip came in from a concerned citizen in the suburb of Roseville. They'd noticed something unusual at a house in their neighborhood. The windows were covered with heavy curtains at all hours. Strange sounds could be heard from inside, and the man who lived there had been acting erratically, purchasing large quantities of food and supplies that seemed excessive for one person living alone. Police decided to investigate. When they ran a background check on the resident, one name came up: Ming Senu. Ming Senu was a 30-year-old man who worked as a custodian. He lived alone in a small house on Harriet Avenue. On the surface, he seemed unremarkable, quiet, a loner. But when investigators dug deeper, they discovered something chilling. Ming Senu had been a student at Ramsey High School in the late 1960s. Mary Stoffer had been his ninth grade algebra teacher. 15 years earlier, when Ming Senu was just a teenage student sitting in Mary's algebra class, he had developed what he later described as an infatuation with her. But this wasn't the typical schoolboy crush that fades after a semester. This was something far darker. Mary, of course, had no idea. She was simply doing her job, teaching math to dozens of students every year. Ming was just another face in the classroom. When he graduated and moved on, Mary never thought about him again. But Ming never stopped thinking about her. For 15 years, he obsessed over Mary Stoffer. He followed her movements. He learned where she lived. He studied her routine. He knew about her missionary work, her children, her husband. He watched from a distance, constructing an entire fantasy world in his mind where Mary belonged to him. And he'd been planning this abduction for over a decade. According to later testimonies, Ming had attempted to kidnap Mary at least 4 times before May 16, 1980. Each time, something had gone wrong. Someone had been nearby. The timing hadn't been right. Mary had changed her plans at the last moment. She never knew how close she'd come to being taken. But on that Friday afternoon in May, everything finally aligned for Ming. Mary and Beth left the beauty salon at 4:30. They got into the Ford LTD and started driving home. Ming had been watching. He'd been waiting. And this time, he didn't fail. What happened next was reconstructed through later testimony and evidence. Ming forced Mary's car off the road. He was armed and threatening. He ordered Mary and 8-year-old Beth out of the vehicle at gunpoint. In a struggle, the license plate from Mary's car was knocked loose and fell to the ground. Ming didn't notice. He forced them into his own vehicle and drove them to his house on Harry Avenue. There, he led them down into the basement, where he'd prepared a small, concealed space. It was barely large enough for 2 people hidden behind a false wall. This is where he imprisoned Mary and Beth. But Ming wasn't finished. Later that same afternoon, he returned to Hazel Teen Park. This is where he encountered 6-year-old Jason Wilkman playing with his friend Carl. The reason Ming took Jason has never been fully explained, but investigators believe it was a crime of opportunity. Perhaps he thought having another hostage would give him more leverage. Perhaps his deteriorating mental state led him to act impulsively. Whatever the reason, he grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk of his car. Carl witnessed the entire thing, but wasn't seen by Ming. He ran home and reported what he'd seen, which is how police became aware of Jason's abduction so quickly. Ming brought Jason back to his house and held him captive along with Mary and Beth. For the first few days, all 3 of them were held in that cramped, dark basement space, terrified and confused. Ming controlled every aspect of their existence. When they could eat, when they could speak, when they could move. And then, tragedy struck. 6-year-old Jason Wilkman was a spirited, energetic child. Being confined in a small space was unbearable for him. He cried. He asked for his parents. He tried to escape. Ming saw Jason as a liability. The boy was too young to be controlled through fear alone. He was too loud, too unpredictable. On the second day of captivity, Ming made a decision that would seal his fate forever. He took Jason away from Mary and Beth. Mary heard sounds from another part of the house. Then silence. Jason Wilkman was never seen alive again. Ming later confessed that he had taken Jason to a remote location and ended the little boy's life. He buried the body in a wooded area where it wouldn't be easily found. For weeks, Jason's parents held out hope that their son would be found alive. But that hope was based on a lie. Jason had been gone since the beginning. Mary was devastated. She tried to comfort the little boy during their time together in captivity. She tried to keep him calm, to tell him everything would be okay. Now he was gone, and there was nothing she could have done to save him. Ming returned to the house and continued holding Mary and Beth captive. The nightmare was far from over. For 53 days, Mary and Beth Stoffer remained prisoners in Ming Senu's basement. The conditions were horrific. They were kept in near total darkness, with minimal food and water. Ming controlled every aspect of their lives, using fear and manipulation to keep them compliant. He forced Mary to write the letters that were sent to Irving, dictating every word. He allowed Beth to make that Father's Day phone call, but only under his strict supervision. During this time, Mary endured repeated assaults. She did everything she could to protect her daughter, trying to keep Beth's spirits up, telling her that they would be rescued, that her father was looking for them, that they just had to stay strong a little longer. Beth, only 8 years old, showed incredible courage. She stayed quiet when Ming demanded silence. She comforted her mother when she could, and she never gave up hope. Mary later said that her faith was the only thing that kept her going during those dark weeks. She prayed constantly. She believed that God had not abandoned them, even when it felt like the entire world had forgotten they existed. But outside that basement, the investigation was intensifying. On July 15th, 1980, police finally had enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for Ming Senu's residence. Armed officers surrounded the house on Harriet Avenue, prepared for the worst. When they entered the home, it appeared empty. But then they heard something, a faint sound coming from a basement. Officers descended the stairs and discovered the false wall. Behind it, they found Mary and Beth Stoffer, weak, malnourished, and traumatized but alive. The moment of their rescue was overwhelming. Mary collapsed into the arms of the officers, sobbing. Beth clung to her mother. After 53 days in captivity, they were finally free. Ambulances arrived. Mary and Beth were taken to the hospital for evaluation and treatment. Irving was notified immediately and rushed to be with his family. The reunion was emotional beyond words. Irving held his wife and daughter, unable to speak, tears streaming down his face. They were home. They were safe. But the ordeal had left scars that would never fully heal. While Mary and Beth's rescue was a moment of relief, there was still one question that haunted everyone. Where was Jason Wilkman? Ming Senu was immediately taken into custody. During interrogation, he remained cold and detached. He showed no remorse, no empathy. When pressed about Jason's whereabouts, he initially refused to answer. But eventually, under pressure from investigators, Ming confessed. He led police to a wooded area outside of Roseville. There, buried in a shallow grave, they found the remains of 6-year-old Jason Wilkman. The news devastated Jason's family. For nearly 2 months, they'd held on to hope. They believed that their little boy was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Learning the truth was unbearable. Jason's funeral was held shortly after. The entire community mourned. A little boy who'd done nothing wrong, who'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, had lost his life because of one man's twisted obsession. Ming Senu was charged with multiple counts, including kidnapping, assault, and the murder of Jason Wilkman. His trial began in early 1981. During the proceedings, the full extent of his obsession with Mary Stauffer came to light. Investigators found journals in his home filled with writings about her. He kept photographs. He tracked her movements for over a decade. The evidence painted a picture of a man consumed by delusion, unable to distinguish fantasy from reality. Ming showed no remorse during the trial. He sat expressionless as victim impact statements were read. He barely reacted when Mary took the stand and recounted the horrors of their 53 days in captivity. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Ming Senu was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he received a 40-year sentence for the murder of Jason Wilkman. The judge made it clear Ming would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Mary and Beth Stoffer, the rescue was just the beginning of a long journey toward healing. Both underwent extensive therapy to process the trauma they'd experienced. Beth, only 8 years old when she was taken, struggled with nightmares and anxiety. She had trouble trusting people. She was afraid to be alone. But with the support of her family and professional help, she slowly began to recover. Mary dealt with her own trauma while also trying to be strong for her daughter. She carried guilt, wondering if there was something she could have done differently, some way she could have prevented what happened. Therapists assured her that she was not to blame. Ming's obsession had been building for 15 years. There was nothing she could have done to stop it. Irving stood by his family through it all. He put his own grief and anger aside to focus on helping his wife and daughter heal. The missionary trip to the Philippines was, of course, canceled. The family stayed in Minnesota, trying to rebuild their lives. In the years that followed, Mary made the difficult decision to speak publicly about her experience. She wanted to raise awareness about stalking and obsession. She wanted other victims to know they weren't alone. She wanted to honor Jason's memory by ensuring that what happened to them would never be forgotten. In 2009, a Lifetime movie titled Abducted, The Mary Stauffer Story, was released, bringing national attention to the case. Mary cooperated with the production, hoping that sharing her story might help others recognize the warning signs of dangerous obsession. Jason Wilkman's family also chose to turn their grief into action. They established a foundation in his name, dedicated to protecting children and supporting families affected by violence. They advocated for stronger laws around child safety and worked with law enforcement to improve response protocols for missing children cases. Jason's mother often said that while her son's life was tragically short, his legacy would live on through the lives they could help save. The community of Roseville never forgot what happened in 1980. A memorial was placed in Hazeltine Park in Jason's honor, a reminder of the little boy who loved to play and explore, whose life was stolen far too soon. Mary Stauffer eventually returned to teaching, though she left the public school system and instead taught at a private Christian school where she felt safer. She remained active in her church and continued to do missionary work, refusing to let Ming Senu's actions destroy the life she'd built. Beth grew up to become a strong, resilient woman. She's spoken in interviews about how the experience shaped her, but didn't define her. She went on to have a family of her own, determined to create a life filled with love and safety. Irving continued his work as a minister, using his family's story as a testament to faith and perseverance. He often said that while they'd been through hell, they'd also witnessed miracles. The miracle of their rescue, the miracle of their survival, the miracle of their healing. As for Ming Senu, he remains incarcerated. He will never be released. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, a consequence of his choice to let obsession consume him. The case of Mary Stauffer, Beth Stauffer, and Jason Wilkman is a reminder of how quickly an ordinary day can turn into a nightmare. It's a reminder that evil can hide behind the most mundane facades. And it's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and resilience can prevail. Mary's story is also a stark warning about the dangers of obsession and stalking. Ming Senu wasn't a stranger who appeared out of nowhere. He was a former student who'd been quietly fixating on his teacher for 15 years. He'd been planning, watching, waiting. If you or someone you know is experiencing stalking or feels unsafe due to someone's unwanted attention, please reach out for help. You don't have to face it alone. Thank you for watching this episode. This was a difficult story to tell, but it's an important one. If you found value in this video, please give it a like and leave a comment below with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Remember, these aren't just stories. These are real people, real families, real lives forever changed. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next case.